Tempering validated research with over 20 years of on-the-ground experience building engineering organizations, we're changing the way you think to change the way you lead. Welcome to the TTL Podcast. Hello, everyone. After a couple weeks where Andy and I have been on different schedules, and hence you had vacation casts from one of each of us, we are back together and discussing today the CMM, or Capability Maturity Model, I believe is what that stands for. And the idea for this episode came out of our previous episodes talking about certain models to help you think about the world and to use in diagnosis. And I can't remember, Andy, but why did we land on CMM? Was the last model we talked about derived from CMM? Is that what led us down this path?
Not quite derived from it, but related to it. We were talking about the team software process, the TSP. Mm-hmm. And the TSP is part of the suite of things from the SEI, which is from CMU. I'm going to see how many acronyms I can get in here.
Keep going.
And the SEI CMM, or CMMI, as it is now, which used to be the SWCMM.
You're doing well.
Yeah, thank you. It's a suite of processes that go together with the PSP, the TSP, and the CMM about how Watts-Humphrey thought that software development should be done. And the CMM came out of working with the DoD. There, I got another one. Mm-hmm. To give them guidance about what good organizations would look like.
Right.
And specifically, we got to this because we were looking at the TSP, and TSP was explicitly at the team level, and we found a thing describing that the CMM was at the organizational level, TSP was the team level, and so we were a little underwhelmed by TSP. We kind of liked it for its measures. We liked it for its symptoms that you might find in the measures that they had, but it didn't seem to have any system.
Right.
It had its process, but it didn't have a system that explained, well, if you changed this, what would you expect to happen? Mm-hmm. And we thought, well, CMM being at the more organizational level, maybe it will have a system.
Right. Okay. That's exactly how we arrived here. Nice use of acronyms, by the way. I think the last one, DoD, is the one that informs us about why there are so many acronyms above it. So CMU is Carnegie Mellon University. That's where this model was developed. And I believe the first version was published in 1991, so quite a while ago. And it lives on, I think. And so therefore, I think we can take away that there may be some value to this. And as you mentioned, Andy, it was originally written for the DoD to assess maturity models and actually to guide them, I believe, in selecting vendors to say, hey, if I'm looking for a vendor, a government vendor, can I fit them into this model and decide where they are in the maturity chain and use that as a differentiating basis for selection of vendors.
And use it as a way of helping vendors be better.
Right.
I think is another idea behind it.
Right. And actually, that's the next thing, which is when we think about the CMM today, obviously it's gone beyond, or to your point, the evolution of the CMMI, it's gone beyond just for the DoD in selecting vendors. It's used by consultants and other people to diagnose, right? That's one of the key words for this season, to diagnose effectiveness of software organizations. So CMM and CMMI are really big, but maybe the first thing we can do is just walk through the high level, their proposal of the levels of maturity within an organization. Does that sound like probably the right place to start?
Yeah, and I think it will give everyone some grounding, something to hold on to for when we're talking about what this is and our assessment of it, why we might have that. Mm-hmm. So just going through it really quickly, it's got, well, depending on which version you look at, the one I'm looking at right now is the V1.1 of CMMI. What they have is 6 levels, and historically it had been 5 levels. And what they have is the 0th level. Like any good Asimov people, you always have to start from the 0th law. And that's incomplete. What they would call that is that you've got basically no process. Then their first level of CMMI is performed. You have a process, you perform it. The second level is managed. You manage what it is you're doing. The third is defined, which is that you actually know what you're doing. Sounds kind of strange that you'd be going in that order, but I think what they're getting at is that you get more and more attuned to what it is you're actually doing as you go up in the levels. Then level 4 is they are quantitatively managed. So this is where they start spending a lot of time looking at metrics, looking at measures, knowing exactly the number of bugs going out and the number of lines of code and the effort that went in and all of those things. From the TSP discussion, I bet a lot of that is geared towards really getting to that quantitatively managed level. And level 5 is optimizing. You're paying attention and you're improving as a matter of course. I think the idea is that up until that point, most likely optimizing or improving is a thing that you do in special circumstances.
Right.
Whereas at level 5, improving is a thing that you do just as a thing that you do.
And you mentioned that this is the version 1.1 of CMMI, about a decade
Yeah.
in from the original CMM.
Yeah.
The original levels from the CMM, they had 5 levels. They, as you mentioned, they were missing the incomplete. And they aligned pretty well with the CMMI levels, right? I think number 5 was optimization. That was very clear for both levels. I
Yeah.
did like that they called level 2 repeatable, though, because it made more sense in my mind than to call it
Managed.
managed,
Yeah.
right? I think, look, like now we're getting a little bit all over the place. Why don't we align them a little bit? So there's number 0, which we called incomplete. Number 1, the original called initial, and the new model called performed. Essentially the same thing. You are doing a process versus not doing a process. I think I like performed a lot better because initial means nothing, right?
Yeah.
So number 2, the original called repeatable, the new model called managed. I like the repeatable nomenclature because I think the idea is that you have something and you can repeat it for multiple projects.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes a bit more sense to me as well.
And I think the idea is you don't really know how it works or how it's functioning, but you know it delivers something at various stages of the process. And so, and then you can use that to say, okay, well, we need to run these 5 things. And thing 1 will deliver one thing, and then thing 2 will consume that. And eventually you'll get some software at the end, right?
Yeah.
And then level 3 for each is defined, which is fine. And as you were mentioning, this is around the concept that you can now know kind of what's going on in thing 1 a little bit instead of input into thing 1 and there's an output. You're like, oh, input into thing 1 and the output is because there's some things happening within thing 1. And I can look into it and say, oh, well, that thing is or is not happening, right? Level 4, quantitatively managed versus managed. I like the fact that quantitatively is in the new models level description because that is, as you were mentioning, what this level is all about. The difference between this level and the previous level is you can see into the box, but not only can you see into it, now you're actually measuring what's going on in the box, right?
Yeah.
You're not just saying, is this thing happening or not happening? You're saying, well, is it happening well? Is it going poorly? Is it trending poorly? So I like that quantitative in there. And then number 5, optimizing. You said it well, just continuous optimization versus one-off.
Yeah. And for all of this, the point of these levels in some ways is for a person to know whether or not you should be able to deliver a particular software project. If it's going to be a highly complicated thing like the DoD might ask someone to do, they're looking for places that are probably a level 4 or higher, maybe level 3. If you're just making a web app, you can probably get away with between levels 1 and 3. And they even say that. They're like, look, not everyone needs to be level 5.
Hmm.
So I guess, Mon-Chaio, the question is, does this help us? Does this whole model help us in this diagnosis sphere? Does it add anything that we didn't already have?
It's interesting that you mentioned diagnosis sphere. I was going to answer differently, but obviously we should be thinking about it that way, Andy. I mentioned at the beginning, that's kind of the theme word for this season. I think in some ways it does, and in some ways it doesn't. I think if I'm reading some of these articles correctly, they themselves will say that this is kind of a way of figuring out what the maturity levels are, but the details within it, like the individual processes or why the individual processes work, are kind of left, I feel like, as an exercise to the reader, right? It's a framework to say, do you align? But if you don't align, there's no way to figure out, well, where do you go and why?
Yes, I agree with you. So my reading of it as I was going through it, because I was reading it, I was just like, I felt empty as I was reading through, and I scanned a lot of this 703 page PDF that I have. I didn't read closely every part of it, but as I was reading it, I came up with CMM doesn't have, for all of its thing about quantitatively measured. I didn't find much about like quantitative measures that they prescribe that you should do.
Hmm.
There's probably a few that I might have skipped, but it wasn't heavy on it, not like TSP. So it doesn't give us much on that side of the diagnosis spheres, those four spheres of knowledge that we talked about. It does give you kind of a little bit on the symptom side. Along with CMM, there's an entire diagnostic thing, a kind of like a survey you can do to figure out where people stand.
Hmm.
So it does give kind of not quite the measures that we were thinking of. So I guess it is a way a measure, this survey.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it's symptoms. They would say, oh, well, if you find this happening, you should do this. If you find this happening, you should do that. Which then gives the other thing that I found a lot in it is that as you go through the levels, it becomes almost a catalog of activities that you should do. So it gives you a lot of these solutions. It gives you, you can do this and you can do that and you can do this other thing. But I didn't get much out of it in terms of the why.
Hmm.
Like the thing when we were talking about TSP, Mon-Chaio, that I remember you saying, like, I don't know. It doesn't give me any why I should do anything.
Hmm.
It doesn't give me any why 1.0 is the right measure in that case.
Hmm.
And I felt like CMM was a similar thing. It gave me a lot about symptoms I can look for. It gave me a lot about solutions that I can apply. It gave me a lot about, well, slightly less than TSP, about standards that I can do. I guess standards in more a qualitative sense absolutely are there.
Right.
They consider you've got that 5 levels and they have what you should find at each level. But the why you do any of these things, or why or what will happen if I choose this particular practice,
Hmm.
because the whole way that you move up through these levels, which is what they consider mostly you should be doing, is you adopt new practices.
Yep.
But I would want to adopt a practice based on I saw something happening and I have a reasonable guess or a reasonable understanding that rationally this is happening because of these reasons. And if I take on this practice, those reasons will be altered in this way, which will cause that outcome to be different.
Hmm.
And they don't give me much of a model for that.
That's exactly right. I mean, they're missing that top S, that system about how the system relates to each other, such that when you change one thing, this means that it changes the other thing and affects it in this way. And I think a lot of these, I guess I would say, older models to think about software development, it feels to me tend to be like that. It's more, if you do these 6 things, you will be good. As if every software organization in the world produces the same software. And
Hmm.
so you all operate in the same way. And I wonder if that's because, and I don't know this to be true, but there's still this prevailing thought process as well as terminology comparing building software to things like building houses or vehicles or whatever. And those have very defined processes, which you just cookie cutter one to the next, right? It's not like one general contractor builds houses differently from a different general contractor. And that's just not the state of software today, is it?
Maybe that's what they're saying, is that we should be much more standard. Like you are not a special butterfly in the software you make, that you should just be doing the same process as what others do.
So it may be, but I will challenge
It's
that.
not where we are.
I'm not going to challenge you. I will challenge them if that's what they're saying, as well as something that they write in their original paper, which I found pretty interesting. So there is a section in the original paper about the ability of a mature organization to more accurately predict the performance of your organization in delivering software. And they have a pretty little chart that says, well, if you're in level one, your outcomes are going to be very varied, and you'll, only hit your dates maybe closer to sort of the tail end of the bell curve. And when you're at level five, your bell curve is going to be very tight, right? You kind of know what you're going to deliver.
Right.
The last paragraph in that section says, the improvements in predicting a project's results, represented in Figure 2.4, assume that the software project's outcomes become more predictable as noise, often in the form of rework, is removed from the software process. Unprecedented systems complicate the picture, since new technologies and applications lower the process capability by increasing variability. Even in the case of unprecedented systems, the management and engineering practices characteristic of more mature organizations help identify and address problems earlier in the development cycle than they would have detected in less mature organizations. And then they go on to say early detection defects is good or whatever. But it's that first part of it, right? It's goes back to what we were talking about with the wicked problems is what
Yeah.
I'm thinking about. And so I think this fits well for tame problems.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And actually, I was going to say, as you were reading that, the thought that came to my head was, well, software development is basically an activity. This is my hypothesis, and I'm taking it basically from Alistair Coburn. Software development is basically an activity of discovery, learning as a group, interaction, decision making, and trade-offs and judgment. It is not a factory thing where we can drive out that kind of variation on, oh, well, you just write this line of code. Because I will probably never write that line of code again. And in fact, we have methods where I never have to write that line of code again. So I'll never have to revisit that exact same decision again.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my mind, a lot of what we do in software organizations or software heavy organizations is always new. Now, maybe there's edge cases where it's like, we just churn out a website for clients. But even there, it's not the same thing again and again, because each time we're having to interact with a different client who has never made these choices before.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think that underlies a lot of the misunderstanding between folks that are in software and folks that are adjacent and outside of software. And I'm not even talking about, CEOs of companies that are software adjacent. Sometimes that even is the distinction between the product organization of a company and the software development organization of a company,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
This understanding of just because I'm doing another page on the application doesn't make it the same thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, but very often it isn't. And I think that the inability to understand that, I think, is a huge gulf between the people that do and the people that don't.
Yeah. And even if it was 10% of the time, we're doing the exact same thing, something that has been done before by this organization, it's probably not been done that by that exact person or that full group. And then you have the entire question of, well, does the training to make it so that everyone now knows exactly how to do that thing the exact same way every time for that 10% of cases where this might come up, does it actually outweigh the overheads of imposing that training and imposing the structure to make sure that you can do it, and the learning overheads of the people to realize that they've picked up on one of these things that has been done before, and so on and so on.
I think that's an interesting point, Andy. It actually makes me think about maturity of organizations and this new LLM based coding Copilot type of situation.
Oh, really? What has been sparked in your mind? Maybe this is more interesting than where I was about to take us, but let's see. Let's see where this goes.
When we talk about things that are repeatable and known, I think that's what LLMs are really good at. They're good at taking things that have been done before and repeating them with minor variations and spewing that back out. And
Yeah.
I think for less capable organizations, that makes them a giant accelerator. Now, that's not to say that they're not an accelerator for advanced organizations too. I think they absolutely are. But for less capable organizations who are thinking that everything they do is simply a repeat of something they've done before, these LLM copilots are a huge accelerator. But for organizations that understand that there's nuance between everything they do, they're less of an accelerator. And so then the question is, when you take the output of that LLM, how capable are your people of identifying this is the portion that's relevant because it's unchanging, and then this is the portion I have to look into and improve because it is new.
Yeah. Can they separate the wheat from the chaff? The wheat being the interesting new ideas, and the chaff being the it's just run of the mill boilerplate, repeated, an error case that always needs to get handled.
I will say though that throughout my career, I've always repeated it's not the amount of code you type, right? Like the bottleneck in your system isn't how fast you can type out code on the keyboard. But I will say that with LLM introduction, there is some concept of how fast can you spew out 300 lines of code.
I don't think it changes it. And I'll give you the metric that I think doesn't change, but the LLMs can help with based on what you just brought up. I think the true metric of effectiveness, software development effectiveness, is how many validated decisions can you make per day?
Interesting.
And LLMs help in that, in those things that are repeated, where it's like, I've got an error and I paste it into the LLM just like I would have done on Stack Overflow. And it tells me, oh, on your Docker image, you need to install this library because they've stripped out things. Okay. I now try that and I validated that decision. So I can do that faster with the LLM, but I cannot validate a decision faster for something that's about the unique properties of exactly what we're trying to do and how that varies based on our business rules. The LLM isn't going to make me faster on that. So if you take that as our measure of what is an effective software organization, is how many validated decisions can you make, the LLMs help you in some cases, which you could say is like how much code can you output, but it's that they're helping you find validated ideas. But on the things that you need the full validation cycle to do, they're not going to speed you up.
Right. Or they'll speed you up immaterially in
Yeah.
sort of the boilerplate part that we talked about.
Yeah, the little things here and there, getting you past little roadblocks. But to me, that's also why things like test-driven development actually do speed up organizations, because what they say is that what it does is it says that that code that you've written, I have validated that it's correct because I've wrote the test up front, confirmed it with myself, confirmed it with my teammates, confirmed it possibly with my product manager if we're doing this really well. I validated that decision before I even bothered to write the code. And then it validates that the code does what that decision was. So that to me, that's why TDD helps in those things, and why it's connected to that measure.
Interesting.
I bring this up partly because I've been doing interviews recently, interviewing people, and I had someone first time really try to lean on an LLM to solve the problem.
Oh.
And I thought it was fascinating to watch. Spoiler, they didn't do very well.
Hmm.
But what I was watching was that they were missing, to put it in these terms, they were missing validation of their decisions. They were letting the LLM just produce things and produce things and produce things, but they never took it back to say, like, does it do what I need?
Hmm.
They were trying to do that just by reading the code. And they'd read the code and they'd say, no, do this now. Read the code again. No, do this now. But as I watched it, I was like, and I told them eventually, I said, I don't think this is getting you any closer to a working solution.
Hmm.
And that was the thing I thought was really interesting, was the LLM had no connection to what a validated idea was, but it could produce plenty of reasonable looking solutions.
Hmm. To maybe the wrong problem, possibly,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
don't have the context. Yeah. Um, that's really fascinating. I mean, I think I'm going to be doing a bunch, well, not me, but my org is going to be doing a bunch of interviewing too. And I think you just sparked that idea that maybe I should track and see how well the LLM assisted interviewers do versus the non LLM assisted. Spoiler alert, we are not going to be doing leak code style questions. And so the boilerplate stuff that the LLM is good for is already eliminated. But
Yeah.
taking this back to CMM, and maybe only tangentially, but we do want to connect the loop at some point. One criticism we talked about with CMM is this idea that it doesn't have a model that it goes by, that it just has a bunch of solutions that it says, hey, there's a bucket of solutions here. This is level 3. Here's a bucket of solutions here. This is level 4. And we said, well, that makes it really difficult to understand the whys. And if you don't understand the why, then it makes it difficult to predict, well, this solution didn't quite work. Now, why? And what part of the solution can I change to make it work better to get to the next maturity level? Because it simply says, just do this. It works. And I feel like that is exactly what vibe coding is with LLMs,
Mm.
right? The LLM, the model for the LLM is stuff that's been done before. In some ways, it's like a CMM model. It says, oh, if you want to do a loop, here are the 17,000 ways I know how to do a loop. You should pick one of these ways if you want to do X, if you want to do Y. And what happens is it spits things out, and you look at it and you say, well, this thing isn't quite working, but you don't know why. If you're a reasonable developer, maybe you do know why, right? But
Yeah.
the LLM doesn't know why. And so it just continually spits out other pieces of things that have worked in the past until hopefully you get to a solution. And so you see a lot of folks who are going down this vibe coding path who aren't engineers. And I mean, a lot of them have never written code before. A
Hmm.
lot of them have never gone to a Linux command line before. And they're just using LLMs to say, oh, it says type this in the command line. I typed that. Here's the error message. I pasted it in. It said type this. And some of them are successful in terms of getting what they think is good product out. And maybe it is good for their use case. But then you see a lot of them reaching out for help, like, here's where I am. And actual engineers are looking at them like, how did you get to this state?
Yeah.
And they can't dig themselves out because they don't have the context to be able to look at something and understand why it's wrong. They just know that
Yeah.
it is wrong.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I'm going to leave us with one thing on that, and then I'll take us to something. Uh, it's an interesting thing to think about on that, which is that they're getting to the point where they can validate a decision,
Hmm.
but there's 100 other decisions that they've made that the question is, have those been validated?
Hmm.
And maybe that's the thing that's going on, is that there's there's a discovery that there's a whole bunch of decisions that don't ever need to be validated up to that point until that other decision is validated.
Uh-huh.
This is kind of like the product market fit test.
Uh-huh.
And you can ignore validating a bunch of those decisions until you've done this one kind of overriding one.
Hmm.
And then what happens after that point? And that's, I think, what you're saying is that they hit this point where all of the other decisions that haven't been validated now suddenly matter.
Hmm. And do they know how to pop back into the stack into figuring that out?
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right, back to CMM again,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is, I'm going to say, we're kind of giving the whole thing short shrift. Not entirely, but somewhat,
Hmm.
because it has things that I think it could claim are models.
Okay.
In the document, as they describe it, they have these process areas. And in each one of the process areas, they provide a diagram describing interactions between the parts, interactions among the engineering process areas, the one that I have on my screen right now.
Hmm.
And what it says is that, for instance, requirements management feeds requirements into the engineering process area. And you have requirements development, which feeds product and product component requirements back into the requirements management. And it has these other interactions. And what they're trying to get to there is a bit of a model of how do all of these parts interact to produce the whole.
Hmm.
But it just feels like it falls flat to me. And I think I was thinking about this. I was trying to figure out, like, why does this feel like it falls flat? What is missing? And I think one is that what they've actually got here is just, well, here's some data flows.
Hmm.
That basically it's a data flow diagram. Oh, you've got this activity and this data flows from here to here. But it doesn't tell you anything about the influence it has on that other activity.
Hmm.
It doesn't tell you anything about the impact, the effect that it has. And Mon-Chaio, do you know when we read a bunch of these more scientific papers that are like social science research and things, and they'll have these diagrams where they'll have boxes and arrows, and then they'll put numbers on those arrows, or sometimes they'll just have a plus or a
Oh
minus.
yeah, absolutely.
Those are kind of like this world of how you say, well, this thing influences these other things
Hmm.
and it increases it or decreases it. It's like you have these different measures of these different things that can be going on. And this increases or decreases that, and this increases or decreases this other thing. And that's how it influences the world around it, each one of those components. And that's what's missing here is we have named areas and data that flows between them, as you might get in like something in biology of like the ATP cycle.
Hmm.
It's like, oh well, this molecule comes in here, it gets modified by this enzyme, and then it's into this molecule that goes into these two places, and these reactions happen. It's kind of that without the magnitudes applied and without kind of other things. So I think if they wanted a model around this, what they would have is all of their measures that are probably in TSP and other things. And then they would have their activities, and they would have qualitative or quantitatively backed data on what are the effect sizes and effect directions from each of these activities on each one of those measures. And that would start giving us a bit of a model because then you'd also have like, well, if you do this activity, it will decrease your ability to do this activity because of this mediating with this mediated variable and all of those kinds of things. It would start giving us a why. Why do these things happen?
Yeah. Oh, 100% agree. I love that level of thinking. And I think you're absolutely right. And when we talk about quantitative measures, it doesn't have to be for every requirements word adds 1.3% effectiveness to the product. It can be like in those social sciences papers just to say, look, this is a mediating factor, right? Versus another effect that's stronger or weaker. And so you know, oh, well, if I do this, this will affect this, but it doesn't directly affect it. Versus, oh,
Yeah.
there is a direct effect on this and it is large or small. Um, and in some ways, that's how anybody who wants to develop a systems model works, isn't it? At least I think it is. You kind of do your research and you do your audits about what's out there and you figure out, oh, here's what we're doing and here's the discrete processes and here's how they kind of fit together. And then you have to think about, well, now that I have all of that stuff and I can describe the way the system works today, how can I describe the way that the system evolves from that and the steps that the system will go through in order to evolve and why certain things change. So the bones are here, right? And to your point, they can just layer on the next additional part. Not to say that's easy. That may be the most difficult part of systems model
Very,
development.
very likely it's the most difficult part. I mean, just evidentially, it's the most difficult part. They've come up with all of these symptoms and these solutions and these measures, and we have hundreds of these things, different processes and all of that. And what we don't really have very strongly is, well, how do all these things interact?
Hmm.
And how much of an impact will me telling my team to adopt test-driven development actually have
Right,
on our ability to ship on time,
right.
something like that?
Well, and that's also what, for non-technical folks, that's what they're looking for because often they see that in their other disciplines, rightly or wrongly about how those other disciplines measure. They have those measurements for their sales team, for example. They know that every 5 clients that they call, they get a certain output. And so they look for that from engineering organizations. But I think because of the state of engineering research, a lot of this comes out as to like, we don't know, but we know this is good. Or even worse, right? That we talk about a lot. Google does this,
Yeah.
so we're doing it. And what's really funny, the last thought I actually have, and maybe you have a final thought and we can wrap this up. Level 5 in their maturity model is continuous improvement. But I find it difficult to truly continuously improve if you don't understand the whys. It feels like the only thing you can do is sort of reduce the portions of the quantitative metrics that you know about. Oh, this my code coverage is 60%. I need to get that up to 75%.
No.
That's
Our
the only
code reviews take 2 days. We need to get that down to 1 day now.
right. But in between the systems, to your point, the arrows and the magnitudes, you can't say, well, I need to eliminate code reviews at this point in time for my software project. This model gives you no option to do that as part of its continuous improvement process. I love the idea that they say continuous improvement is the height of a mature organization, because I think that in itself means that the majority of organizations aren't mature enough. But I just don't think they give the tools for us to be able to do that well in this model.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, I agree with you on that.
All right. Well, this was a really fun thing to talk about, Andy. I'm glad you thought about this as we were talking about TSP, because like you, I'd seen the acronym CMM all over the place and just never actually read about it. And it was a good opportunity to really dig in and say, what was the level of thinking here and how did it drive all of these other spawns that populate the software engineering world today. Well, I hope all of you listeners have enjoyed our conversation as we talked quite a bit about CMM and then kind of veered off and talked about LLMs and Copilot and all of those types of things. But this is kind of what we do. We wander about. We try to find the interesting parts of the conversation. Did we miss anything? I mean, the paper that Andy was referencing was, what, 700 pages?
Yeah.
And I think the original CMM paper was, about 50 pages. All of these things are
What is
large.
it that big of a difference?
It's a huge difference, yes. So maybe you have dug deep into CMM. Maybe you're using it to assess the maturity of organizations. Maybe you work in the government. Maybe you're a contractor. And you think that we've missed something because obviously we can't cover 50 or 700 pages in a single episode. Write us. Let us know. What do you think about CMM or our tangential topic? What do you think about vibe coding and LLMs? Maybe we should just do a whole series on that, Andy. I feel like we could occupy half of a season there. So write us. Hosts at thettlpodcast.com. That's hosts with an S, We always love to hear what you think. Also, for folks that heard Andy's vacation cast, Andy will be at least temporarily leaving the podcast. And who knows what the future holds if he comes back as a master woodworker and decides not to want to podcast about software engineering, technical, organizational topics anymore. Also, write to us and let us know, how would you like this podcast to evolve? Would you like to be the next co-host, temporary or not, of the TTL podcast? Would you like more case studies? Would you like more vibe podcasting where we just look at the latest LinkedIn post and talk about what we think about it? Also, let us know, hosts at theTTLpodcast.com. Listeners like you all are why we are successful, and we want to make sure that what you want, we can help deliver. All right, folks, until next time, be kind and stay curious.